Good morning and welcome everyone to episode 19 of the ESH Lounge, Environment, Safety and Health, being our main focus areas. So welcome to episode 19. We've had a change of times from previously, where it was 9 to 11 o'clock Central African time, whereas now it's 10 to 12 to cater for others. But nonetheless, welcome to those that have been able to join us. And I hope you find it interesting and informative. Feel free to post any questions or comments via the chat box or through email, WhatsApp, or any of the other platforms that we are on. So without wasting more time, so today's agenda, our main topic will be OSHE in Africa. Towards the end, we'll have a group photo that we can go through, that we can take. As part of capturing history. Some housekeeping rules. Please mute your microphone when the speaker is speaking, and to avoid any disruptions, you may leave your video on. Feel free to use the chat for Q&A and for comments, and also encourage you to use your reaction buttons, and let's learn and enjoy. This would be quite an interactive, debative session, so feel free to raise your hand and we can discuss key points as we go along. So by way of introduction, my name is Fungai Mupunga, and today I'm here presenting on OSHE in Africa, state of the continent. This is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, and I hope as we go along through the journey of environment, safety and health, we can raise the standards for everyone. You know, just like we aim to empower ourselves and liberate ourselves economically, I think it's important that we do the same from an ESH perspective. So getting stuck into it. So when we talk Africa, here are a few facts. As of 2021, Africa had 1.37 billion people on the continent living in 54 countries. And every year, 500,000 new 15-year-olds come in, enter or are introduced to the continent. 70% or more of the population is under the age of 30, and the population is expected to double by 2050. That will take us to 3.2 billion people. And the workforce by 2040 will be expected to be 1 billion and will be at the largest at the time. So this shows the potential for Africa. We all know that Africa is well endowed in terms of resources. It's got a strong young labor force as well, but the reality is that a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of factors and variables come into play through the economic emancipation that is coming through. So with Africa, here are the numbers when it comes to ESH. So 59,000 work-related fatalities. That is approximately 4.3% of the population in Africa. And 4 million non-fatal accidents are registered every year. It is also that less than 10% of workers have access to occupational health services. So with the entire workforce, only less than 10% have access to that. The risk of ill health in Africa is 10 to 10 times higher than in developed countries. I think this paints a glim picture for us in Africa in terms of the safety and health of workers or economic participants. I mean, when only 10% have access to occupational health services, it means we're in a lot of trouble. It means that a lot of people are suffering out there in their workplaces, or once they're ill or injured when they leave the workforce. And the number of fatalities is very high at 59,000, accounting for 4.3% of the entire population. So that paints a picture that a lot of work needs to be done, and particularly with the anticipated growth that is expected with Africa, it puts some serious concern. Now, comparatively, when we look at a global scale, 6,000 deaths are registered daily in the workforce, 2.34 million work-related fatalities take place annually, which is approximately 0.03% of global population at 7 point something billion. So when you compare with our statistics here in Africa, 4.3% compared to 0.03. It's a stark contrast. So globally, 160 million work-related illness takes place and 340 million accidents occur. The cost to global domestic product, GDP of the world, is 4%. Now in Africa, it's likely to be higher, but we have a few challenges in terms of our data capturing, which we'll touch base on as we go through the presentation. So continuing on with the numbers, reports or research shows that 0.35 to 49.42 injuries per 1,000 workers. Now that's a very broad range. It shows that amongst the 54 countries, there's a huge variability in terms of performance. 0.85 to 21.6 fatalities per 100,000 workers. Now, that is 216 per million workers here in Africa, die every year. And the median fatalities in that range is 14.02 per 100,000 workers. 3/4 of all fatalities come from a few sectors, mainly transport, agriculture, construction, and mining. So again, the statistics that we have in front of us paint a very gloom picture. The variability of data from 0.35 to 49.42 injuries per 1,000 workers. Definitely there's different capacities and seriousness in taking ESH measures or undertaking ESH measures. Now there's other influences to this data. The reliability of data is obviously one that comes into question, the variability of standards of measuring and levels of implementation of controls, but we'll address that as we go along. So globally, some history that comes with ESH in Africa. So from a global perspective, in 1950, the ILO and World Health International Labour Organization and World Health Organization, WHO, they defined occupational health as the promotion and maintenance of the highest degree of physical, mental, and social well-being of workers in all occupations. Things developed in 1954. There was a realization and extended efforts to improve workplace conditions. In 1979, WHO and ILO had a resolution on the Comprehensive Workers' Health Program, as well as a resolution that encouraged countries to integrate occupational health into primary healthcare services and to cover underserved populations. In 1996, the Global Strategy on Occupational Health for All was signed with the WHO collaborating centers driving it. So that's some history around the journey of safety and health at a global scale. Now, of course, Africa has also had its own journey. In 1968, Nigeria hosted the Occupational Health for Developing Countries in Africa. Now, carrying on some significant time lapse, I'm sure there was work taking place in the background. But in 2000, WHO and ILO formed a joint effort on OHS in Africa. In 2002, Health and Environment, a strategy for the African region, was adopted by WHO and ILO. 2003, a statement of intent was signed by ILO and the WHO directors. And in 2005 in Benin, there was a conference, a global meeting to review OHS in Africa. So it's not a new thing that has started recently. It's something that's been spoken about and actions have been taken. Suppose the challenge is the impact of those initiatives, what impacts they've had in terms of implementation and improving the livelihood of workers and economic participants. So the challenges. Before we go on to challenges, any comments or thoughts in terms of the history and where we are in terms of statistics? Feel free to add or challenge. Okay. We'll continue on. So Africa faces a few challenges in terms of performance and delivering the environment, safety, and health standards, or improving them, so to speak. And One of the things that comes into mind, sorry, just bear with me. So we've touched on the history. Okay, so Africa challenges. So there is obvious competing priorities from a political, economic, and social aspects. Fair to say it's a common challenge across the globe. But I think here in Africa, it tends to be quite dominant as those three sectors or facts tend to clash. There's a lack of recognition of OSHE as a crucial cog in national development. Underperforming economies, they tend to have a dent in terms of focus and prioritization of OSHE. A focus on growth and profitability, matters of the stomach tend to dominate focus. And it's fair to say that even enterprises with small and medium enterprises rising on the African continent and globally, focus tends to prioritize their formalization and driving growth and profitability. As I mentioned, the informal sector that's been growing significantly. I know in some countries, there's numbers of 90% of the working population being informal. So of course, the regulation and enforcement of challenges of OSHE issues becomes quite a challenge. The education curriculum is not addressing OSHE matters. I think for many people, the first time they really start talking about occupational matters for safety, health, and environment is when they enter the workforce, which by then they're usually an adult, and fair to say, old habits die hard. If you've grown up taking some serious risk, and then all of a sudden you're being told that before you carry anything, put on a pair of gloves, that adjustment can be a challenge. Another one of Africa's challenges is regulatory and enforcement institutions that often are not sufficiently equipped to deal with OSHE issues. We'll expand a bit more on some particular challenges. So regulatory and enforcement, I think, is a big one. Comparatively, when we look at the top performing countries in terms of OSHE, you see that they tend to have a very strong regulatory and enforcement regime. Whereas when you come across to Africa, the institutions tend to not be sufficiently equipped to deal with these issues. It's a fact that many countries are yet to establish even basic OSHE policies that guide the nation and industry in terms of setting the benchmark of standards and expectations. Often there's a lack and unavailability of resources in terms of to drive OSHE, whether it be from a promotion perspective or whether it be from an inspections and enforcement or training aspects. There's inadequate regulatory framework. I think we touched that in terms of lack of policies. And further, that there is weak procedural and administrative justice systems focused on ESH. I think you find in many other aspects of the law, there is sufficient addressing. But when it comes to OSHE matters, there tend to be some serious gaps that need to be looked at. And also fair to say that the historical, administrative, and bureaucratic structures tend to make it very difficult for OSHE implementation. You find that in many countries, OSHE responsibility can be quite varied. OSHE, for example, here in Zimbabwe, the mining sector tends to run its own or runs its own regime, whilst the rest of the manufacturing and other sectors tends to run through the National Social Security legislation. So that variation shifts standards, which make it a challenge in terms of implementation or compliance, particularly where you have contractors shifting from one workplace to another or from one industry to another. So another the challenge areas is data and information. As I was preparing this presentation, I did some research trying to gather some statistics across across the continent and different regions. And fair to say, there's a lack of data. And unfortunately, if you can't measure it, you can't control it. You can't do any trending. Trends cannot be established, which would then allow countries to set focus areas to address or to guide industry in terms of addressing those issues. Enterprise reporting is often compromised, and most of the time is due to a fear of prosecution. I find in many countries they may have a reporting system, but that reporting tends to be done late or inaccurately or not at all. The high informal sector leads to underreporting, and often there's a disconnect between the figures that are presented and the reality on the ground. I mean, where in places where you've got 90% unemployment or official unemployment, that means all those participants in the informal sector. Currently, I don't know of a country where there's a regime to capture that information. So that presents challenges of its own. So that's around data and information. Another of Africa's challenges centers on our human capital. There is some strong points with the fact that we have the youngest population, 70% in many countries being under 30. It means that we've got a great workforce or human resource that is coming through. But unfortunately, what it means is our training needs to be very strong, which at the moment I think is fair to say is quite lacking. So there's a lack of skilled trained personnel amongst the population. There's obvious limited exposure for OSHE practitioners, particularly the recent qualified practitioners. You find that through their training or graduate programs or attachments, exposure levels tend to vary. I think, in my opinion, that the multinationals or the larger corporations give good exposure, but many of the smaller entities, it's often left to those recent qualified practitioners to actually develop systems. So now that means that we end up with a pool that is not very strong from a technical perspective. In Africa, fair to say, there's poor attitudes towards occupational health and safety practices. Often it is seen as a cost rather than a cost saver. And the cost of accidents tends to be very high. And it's always interesting when you have these discussions that the perspective is always buying PPE or putting systems and guarding is an expensive exercise. But when you look at the contrast on the opposite scale, those incidents are actually very expensive. It means you have to, if someone gets injured and has to leave the workplace temporarily, you still have to do the work. So it means you replace that individual. It means that the team that stays behind is strained, as they still have to have the same amount of output. There's usually added cost of retraining someone to cover that role. And then, of course, the return to work management aspect. So, I think our attitude towards it has to shift. Often we are more reactive than anything else. And ideally, we should be more proactive to actually avoid having the incidents or serious injuries and fatalities that we saw in terms of the statistics. And as mentioned, some employers do not realize that they have the legal responsibility to protect employees' health and safety. Time and time again, everyone says, oh, a worker must look after themselves. No, actually, it's the employer's responsibility to provide the necessary resources to ensure OSHE matters are addressed, to ensure that training is done of the employees, and everything else that comes with it. And I think that's an area where that needs to be addressed as a priority if we were to have an upliftment of standards. And often, interesting enough, the money aspects never have issues in terms of management or driving of sales, in terms of driving that or taking ownership But when it comes to OSHE, often now it's that shift of responsibility takes place. So continuing on with the challenges, growth and technology advancement with the young population, and economic emancipation amongst the populace. Fair to say we're starting from a very low base, and growth is expected and will come. There's newer technologies being developed across the world. So it means that the traditional work, the future of work is going to shift. So the traditional laborers approach may change, who knows? But when you look at the future of work with artificial intelligence, robotics, and other technologies, we'll need to retrain workers. Employment will always be there because whatever comes in needs to be looked after. But there'll be some reconciliation that's required between the traditional work methods and the new work methods. And to start off with those traditional work methods, those that are very manual, we tend not to do a good job about them in terms of OSHE meters. Just think of a few of the issues around ergonomics, chemical handling, and machine guarding. So I think the journey would be very interesting, to say the least. So increased infrastructure and construction works that comes also with a growing continent, as well as the rapid industrialization that is taking place. A lot more and more manufacturing and value addition is starting to take place on the continent. With it means that those OSHE meters are going to increase. And as we get more and more direct foreign investment from other parts of the world, you find that those rapid advancement and demand by investors to get a fair return may compromise the focus on OSHE. So newly technologically advanced equipment and processes, a lot of learning is going to have to take place. But at the end of the day, the quicker we grab the bull by the horns, the better we address those issues. The issue will not go away, it will always be there. So poor culture in community, I think this is a big one for us here in Africa. There is the fact that there's limited knowledge when it comes to ESH or OSHE meters. And I think, in my opinion, the colonial era impact can be felt. Back in the day, the focus of the colonialists was driving their objective, which often was maximizing profits and productivity. And I think it's fair to say that at the time, life or health probably was not prioritized amongst the populace. And I think that has, in a way, continued, whether deliberate or indeliberate, but the level or cultural seriousness of OSHE is very compromised. And I think some of those effects come from that period. Education curriculum often does not cover OSHE meters. As mentioned before, for many people, the first time they start talking about safety, health, and is when they enter the workforce. The environment, fair to say, we tend to learn that as we grow in terms of water conservation and rain and the like. But when it comes to the occupational perspective, we talk waste management, waste segregation, and some of those practices, recycling materials and maximizing their use. You find that I think there's still a lot of gaps in terms of curriculum. Here in Zimbabwe, I think road safety is actually taught from a very early on age. I've seen the primary school books talk around safety in agriculture on the workplace. So I think it's a good start, but I think, we're still just scratching the surface. More needs to be done as you go through from ECD through to primary, secondary, and through into university. You can't start taking it seriously when you enter the workforce, or knowing about it when you enter the workforce. And I think the disconnect between industry and the education providers, those gaps, they need to work together more so that the education sector provides well-resourced individuals that come to the workplace. Otherwise, they're operating in silos and everyone is doing their own thing. You hear comments, oh, these graduates, they need to be retrained. We have taught them when they've arrived. And I think one of the biggest challenge we have, and it would be interesting to get opinions of others, often OSHE is considered to be for the workplace. The moment the clock ticks to go home, we tend to leave everything at the gate. Now, fair enough, you want to leave the work behind and forget about it, go home and enjoy a good weekend. But I think there's some value in taking away the safety, health, and environment aspects and applying them at home, sharing what is done at work with the family, applying as you work in the garden, the segregation or sorting of chemicals, putting them in a locked cabinet so they are not easily accessible, ensuring that they are labeled as you work in the garden, wearing gloves and all of that stuff, looking at biological risks in the garden. So I think a great opportunity is there, and I think that's what will drive that community knowledge. Now, I shared that picture that's next. This is here in Zimbabwe. It is common for the what we call combis or emergency taxis. These mini buses or minivans that go around ferrying people. And in the last couple of years, a new practice of maximizing the number of personnel or people that pay for seats on the inside is led to the conductor and other associates standing at the back of the minivan and hanging on through the whole journey, which can be 10, whatever number of kilometers taking place. Now, just stepping off emergency brakes or something going wrong, you can almost, be sure or certain that individual is going to be seriously injured and in a worst case scenario, actually die, either from impact injury or by being run over by the cars following behind. So I think a culture within our community is one that needs to be addressed. I guess it's coupled with knowledge. Now, this is another interesting one that I picked up, around scotch cards. Now, scotch cards are a common mode of transport and a means of ferrying goods within, I'm sure, across Africa. One way or another, we've got some form of transport mode. And this is a paper that was presented at one of these medical conferences. And what they identified that over a 5-year period, 19 patients were admitted. This is in Bulawayo in the northern parts of Zimbabwe. 17 were male, 2 were females. The mean age was 11.42, the median age of 12. The transfer time injury to arrival was between 3 hours to 23 days. So an incident has taken place, the scotch cart has flipped over or they've collided, a head-on collision, if one has ever occurred with scotch carts. But the ferrying of the injured persons has taken between 3 hours and 23 days. So whereby one was serious and within 3 hours they felt, let's go to the hospital. The 23 days probably thought, oh, okay, you'll be fine. And, we relaxed about it and then conditions deteriorated. And then eventually someone was transferred. Now, the injuries that came with it, four patients, blunt chest trauma, 6 patients, blunt abdominal, 4 patients received multiple injuries, and 9 required ICU admission. Now, this was in 2002 when this paper was written. And why I included this, what people would wonder, well, what's the relevance or why even included with the topic being African challenges. What was interesting for me is this article was written from a medical perspective, but there's no way where I've seen a conversation of agri safety addressing scotch carts in general discussion. And if you go into Google and search scotch cart accidents in Zimbabwe, just as recently as I think last week or 2 weeks ago, There was another incident, and there's way more than the 19 that were captured by this study. Now, this is almost 20 years later, and those challenges are still there. Fair to say, we haven't come up with alternative means of equipment or vehicles for the rural folk. But 20 years on, ideally something would be done, or more awareness should have taken place to reduce such. Now, taking it further, amongst us in the workforce, we all come from different backgrounds. Many of our colleagues would have grown up in the rural areas. So again, the challenge of lack of knowledge through our curriculum and awareness is that where someone survived riding in Scotch carts, and then they come into the workforce and then you tell them they can't ride in the back of a truck, whether as a means of transport or during the workforce or during work. Here in Zimbabwe, I think there's legislation that says you cannot ride in the back of a truck with goods. Now, someone who's grown up in an environment where you got animals driving you around or being the engine of the vehicle, going through bumps mixed with grain and the like, and fetching of water and the like, and then they enter the workforce and all of a sudden you're telling them that there's minimum standards in terms of what they should wear and use and what is considered a serious risk. I think that disconnect makes it a challenge and often leads to that complacent attitude. Now, these are some pictures that I found along the way. Now, working at heights, I'm sure globally this is a serious issue. Now, if you look at the picture of on the right, on that wall construction, there's no barriers around it. Now, the scaffold was built more for access rather than the safety of the individual, and there's a bucket bringing up material, probably cement, to the platform. But the intent of the scaffold has never been of ensuring the safety of the individual. And comparatively, when you look at the height, that's a very high wall, considering the size of the vehicle that's next to it. At the bottom there, some works around doing some trusses, installing them. Those 3 individuals, no harness. Now, we grow up climbing trees and probably going at heights maybe further to get some fruits. The picture in the middle, those 2 guys, one is relaxed, one leg, or if it's say half the body above the barrier wall, and I'm sure he felt no issue around that. So those are some of the challenges that I think come in terms of the attitude towards culture and poor standards in the workplaces and lack of knowledge as well. So taking it further, this is a construction of a home. It's, and look, this is not confined to Zimbabwe or Africa alone. Globally, I'm sure if we go online, you see similar pictures, balancing on trusses as you build. But all it takes is one slip and it's a different conversation that is taking place. Another wall, a very high wall, another individual comfortably relaxed, whatever he's doing up there. Perhaps maybe it's a requirement of work, the job needs to be done, but clearly no safety barrier there. Picture at the bottom, you got, now that's a professional setting, that's obviously a shopping mall or a complex being constructed. But you can see there's 2, 4, 5, about 10 individuals scaling their way down from, presumably they were working at the top. I don't see any harnesses being worn there. Perhaps maybe they were wearing them whilst they were up there. But, again, this is now a professional setting, a construction site. And really not much variance with being at doing some roof work at home. On the right, there's some works taking place on the street. Now they're working on electrical cables, on the lights, but zero barrier along the road, and you've got traffic vehicles going past. Now combis or those minivans also drive past, and they stop wherever the customer wants to stop. So a significant risk that comes with it. And some of these things, it need not, as an individual yourself, well informed and considering risk, you'd look to setting some controls to mitigate the risk. Now, that only works if you've been able to identify the risk. And don't be surprised that the tools, the triangles or beacons are in a vehicle nearby. That happens quite often. Now, we touched on informal sector. I think we mentioned it. Now, this picture, that's the marketplace. That's a work environment in itself. Obviously, it comes with its own risks, but clearly no safety and health standards. And now with COVID, I can imagine a scenario of this, if this is still the current case, the physical distancing, social distancing aspect definitely will not be there. And now in a formal workplace, we'll be talking of, okay, these vehicles that are coming through, separation of individuals of vehicles and the like. Now that doesn't quite work in the informal sector. So again, areas that need to be considered and looked at. Pictures, what do they say? Picture speaks 1,000 words. Again, back to our buddies on the minivans, balancing, but the picture in the middle, that's a gate being transported. I guess the workers have to go to the workplace, but in this case, the workers are balancing the gate in the vehicle as it travels. They're using ropes to keep it steady. And yeah, look, from a safety health perspective, clearly, I just imagine whether the conversation even took place between the supervisors or the boss and the workers, in terms of the riskiness of just this exercise. On the far right, you've got transport, they're becoming fairly common here in Zimbabwe. But this vehicle flipping over, it may not be a pretty sight. Some, common activities, cutting of trees. I remember taking this picture. The individual was doing the cutting. He had his chainsaw on a rope, but he himself was free climbing and was seated on one of the branches to keep himself steady, but no harness, no rope, nothing in use. And on the other picture, there was no barricading around the area being cut. It's more signaling to drivers or for the drivers coming through to identify. You can see the picture in the middle, vehicle driving past, one of the tree cutters, the shifting a branch that's been cut off, but clearly no segregation. Now, all that being said, it all comes at a price. And unfortunately, when the safety, health, and environmental incidents take place, it's usually not the enterprise that suffers the most, it's the individual that pays the price of those incidents. Pain and suffering often just come as a given, and often there's limited post-injury or illness support. Often you get hurt, it's probably the immediate response that takes place. Are you okay? We rush you to hospital. But then thereafter, the visits start to decline, or they may not even occur at all. Your family now starts to pick up the responsibility, the visits, the costs. In many cases, it's the post-care that is to take place. And in very sad situations, we looked at some serious numbers in terms of fatalities. Imagine the breadwinner being lost in a household, and more for us here in Africa, whereby our families tend to be very big. There's the immediate and the extended, but we tend to be one. So that impact can be felt way beyond just the immediate family. And unfortunately for many, there's a loss of quality of life. Imagine you become permanently disabled. You're fortunate not to die, but you become permanently disabled. Life all of a sudden takes a different path. And eventually it's an exclusion from the labor market. I mean, when we talk of a 90% unemployment rate, in some of these countries, then it means that chances are, if you were formerly employed, you won't be going back because there's more than enough people queued up to replace you, and probably also willing to take greater risk than you're actually taking. And that's the sad reality of it all, in Africa, and I'm sure in other developing countries. So I think one area that we need to do is to benchmark ourselves against international best practices. That's looking at the legislation and regulation, the regulatory aspects. I think we touched on it, on the fact that often these tend to be weak. Insurance and workers' compensation. Now with an informal sector, I guess it's quite a challenge to have insurance and support services for that sector. Monitoring and evaluation is probably one area that needs to step up. And also benchmarking ourselves or taking the box against the global strategy on occupational safety and health by the ILO, and seeing how we fit in with the sustainable development goals. Now, my intent of the presentation wasn't to come up with the solutions. I'm sure we'll do another series that will address what the challenges or what actions should be taken against those challenges. But clearly the work is cut out. So for me to conclude, having reviewed and reflected, I think much of our OSHE challenges are due to inadequate attention by community, industry, and government in terms of addressing these aspects. Why I put all three is because the community should hold government to account. Same as industry. If the community does not set its own standards or set high expectations, then chances are industry and government or industry will continue to do what it's done and focus on prioritizing productivity and profits. Government can set the legislation, but comes with constraints in terms of support resources. And also, I imagine that if you're a government officer or you're head of safety and health or contributor or participant in one capacity or another. Now, if you do not have the know-how or any knowledge or set standards and expectations around the OSHE, chances are you're not going to prioritize those aspects. I think most countries will have a Ministry of Industry. Now, if the heads of that ministry and policy authors and enforcers, if they themselves have never been exposed to safety, health, and environment, chances are it's not going to be within their priorities. So this is why, I solely put the blame as well as the challenge on these three participants: the community, industry, and the government itself. And some collaborative work has to take place in terms of driving that awareness and education at all levels. So to me, that concludes my presentation and my take in terms of the challenges that Africa faces when it comes to OSHE. Put it to the floor. Any thoughts, comments, opinions around the subject? Feel free to unmute and share. Or was it all in order? Or maybe way off the mark? Okay, no, if there's no comments to discuss or take it further, then I guess, for me, that concludes. That's my take in terms of the challenges that we face and the road ahead. I think we'll do I'm looking forward to doing another presentation where we discuss the different actions that need to be taken place to address or to reduce those gaps in those areas that we've identified. And that responsibility lies amongst ourselves as safety and health practitioners, to disseminate that information to our families and friends, and also to hold ourselves to account. Driving is a good example whereby you see someone drive differently when they're in a company vehicle as opposed to on the weekend when they're driving their own vehicle. There's usually a big shift in terms of behavior. Things that you do not do at work tend to be done at home. So it starts off with us as individuals, but it's our responsibility to take that information and set those standards at home and within our communities. So on that note, thank you so much. I hope you found it informative or that it provoked some thoughts or some reflection on the subject of OSHE in Africa. And on that note, thank you very much, and look forward to catching up again. I think our next session will be next week on Friday. Please note the new session times, Greenwich Mean Time, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. In West Africa time, 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and Central African time, 10 to 12. And in East Africa, it's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So looking forward to another session next week. And as mentioned, hope you found it reflective. And everyone is invited. If you are up for doing a presentation, please contact us via social media. Our September magazine is out, and that will be available, or that is available on the website www.esh.africa. So thank you for your time. Please follow us on social media, post comments and the likes. They give some strong encouragement for continuation of the program, and your support is greatly appreciated. So on that note, thank you very much, and look forward to catching up next week. At this point, you're welcome to turn on your videos and introduce yourselves for the next few minutes.
Hello, everyone. Michael Rujua from City of Harare, Safety Officer.
Hello, Mr. Michael, welcome.
Hope you're fine. We're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Richmond Kote Jonas from Ghana.
Welcome, Mr. Richmond. How are things in Ghana?
Yeah, we are having the same issues as you presented. So more or less, like you said, it's an African issue, and we are looking forward to make sure that the education goes viral so that we will mitigate some of this unsafe acts and conditions in the country. As I'm talking to you, I'm the administrator for OSHE Association, Ghana. That is Occupational Safety and Health Association of Ghana. And July ending, we launched a health and safety advocacy project. So gradually, we are having in touch with the organizations to make sure that they work safely and also train their staffs to also do same. So looking forward, maybe the next 5 years, our education should go to the bottom line of every staff and every member of Ghanaian. So that is our target. Thank you.
Well, that's a great initiative and a good target. I mean, 5 years is a good time frame, but I'm sure you have your work cut out to achieve. So no, well done and congratulations to you.
Thank you, brother.
Okay, I guess on that note, thank you very much, everyone, and look forward to having you again next week on those mentioned session times. Please feel free or please do visit www.esh.africa. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and we also invite everyone to come through. We'll be having, I think we'll be running our sessions until the 3rd of December. So we've got about 8 to 10 sessions. So please, you're welcome to, if you've got a particular topic of interest, please reach out to us. We'd really love to have you on board. Now, before we go, we've got a tradition of taking videos or taking a picture. You know, we can no longer meet physically due to COVID. So it's become a standard practice for us to take a picture. So please turn on your videos and let's have a picture together. That way we can put a face to everyone. Shall we say cheese?
Cheese.
Cheese. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and wishing you a wonderful Friday and weekend wherever you are. And we look forward to catching up next week. Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.